Latter-day Pamphlets. Number 7. Hudson's Statue. Thomas Carlyle. July 1, 1850. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. At St. Ives in Huntingdonshire, where Oliver Cromwell farmed and resided for some years, the people have determined to attempt some kind of memorial to that memorable character. Other persons in other quarters seem to be, more or less languidly, talking up the question. In country papers I have read emphatic heading articles, recommending and urging that there should be a people's statue of this great Oliver, statue furnished by universal contribution from the English people, and set up, if possible, in London, in Huntingdon, or failing both these places, in St. Ives, or Nasbyfield. Indeed, a considerable notion seems to exist in the English mind, that some brass or stone acknowledgment is due to Cromwell, and ought to be paid him. So that the vexed question, shall Cromwell have a statue? Appears to be resuscitating itself, and the weary public must prepare to agitate it again. Poor English public, they really are exceedingly bewildered with statues at present. They would fain do honor to somebody, if they did but know whom or how. Unfortunately they know neither whom nor how. They are, at present, the farthest in the world from knowing. They have raised a set of the ugliest statues, and to the most extraordinary persons, ever seen under the sun before. Being myself questioned, in reference to the new Houses of Parliament some years ago, shall Cromwell have a statue? I had to answer, with sorrowful dubiety, Cromwell? Side by side with a sacred Charles II, sacred George IV, and the other sacred Charleses, Jameses, Georges, and defenders of the faith, I am afraid he wouldn't like it. Let us decide provisionally, no. And now again as to St. Ives and the people's statue, is it not to be asked in like manner, who are the people? Are they a people worthy to build statues to Cromwell, or worthy only of doing it to Hudson? This latter is a consideration that will head us into far deeper and more momentous than sculptural inquiries, and I will request the reader's excellent company into these for a little. The truth is, dear reader, nowhere, to an impartial observant person, does the deep-sunk condition of the English mind, in these sad epochs, and how, in all spiritual or moral provinces, it has long quitted company with fact, and ceased to have veracity of heart, and clearness or sincerity of purpose, in regard to such matters, more signally manifest itself, than in this affair of public statues. Whom doth the king delight to honor? That is the question of questions concerning the king's own honor. Show me the man you honor, I know by that symptom, better than by any other, what kind of man you yourself are. For you show me there what your ideal of manhood is, what kind of man you long inexpressibly to be, and would thank the gods, with your whole soul for being if you could. In this point of view, it was always matter of regret with me that Hudson's statue, among the other wonders of the present age, was not completed. The 25,000 litres subscribed, or offered as oblation, by the hero worshippers of England to their ideal of a man, awoke many questions as to what outward figure it could most profitably take, under the eternal canopy. Questions never finally settled, nor ever now to be settled, now when the universal Hudson Ragnarok, or twilight of the gods, has arrived, and it is too clear no statue or cast metal image of that incarnation of the English Vishnu will ever be molten now. Why was it not set up, that the whole world might see it, that our religion might be seen, mounted on some figure of a locomotive, garnished with script rolls proper, and raised aloft in some conspicuous place, for example, on the other arch at Hyde Park Corner? By all opportunities, especially to all subscribers and pious sacrificers to the Hudson testimonial, I have earnestly urged, complete your sin offering, by, with the £25,000, what utmost amount of brazen metal and reasonable sculptural supervision it will cover, say 10 tons of brass, with a tolerable sculptor, model that, with what exactness art can, into the enduring brass portrait and express image of King Hudson, as he receives the grandees of this country at his levees or soirees and couchés, mount him on the highest place you can discover in the most crowded thoroughfare, on what you can consider the pinnacle of the English world, I assure you he will have beneficial effects there. To all men who are struggling for your approbation, and fretting their poor souls to fiddle strings because you will not sufficiently give it, I will say, leading them to the foot of the Hudson Mount of Vision. See, my worthy Mr. Rigmarole, consider this surprising copper pyramid, in partly human form. Did the celestial value of man's approbation ever strike you so forcibly before? The new Apollo Belvedere this, or ideal of the script ages. What do you think of it? Allah, there is still one God, you see, in England, and this is his prophet. Let it be a source of healing to you, my unhappy Mr. Rigmarole, draw from it uses of terror, as the old divine said, uses of amazement, of new wisdom, of unattainable reflection upon the present epoch of the world. For, in fact, there was more of real worship in the affair of Hudson than is usual in such. The practical English mind has its own notions as to the supreme excellence, knows the real from the spurious avatar of Vishnu, and does not worship without its reasons. The practical English mind, contemplating its divine Hudson, says with what remainder of reverence is in it. Yes, you are something like the ideal of a man, you are he I would give my right arm and leg, and accept a potbelly, with gout and an appetite for strong waters, to be like. You out of nothing can make a world, or huge fortune of gold. A divine intellect is in you, which earth and heaven, and Capel court itself acknowledge, at the word of which are done miracles. You find a dying railway, you say to it, live, blossom anew with scrip, and it lives, and blossoms into umbrageous flowery scrip, to enrich with golden apples, surpassing thus of the Hesperides, the hungry souls of men. Diviner miracle what God ever did? Hudson, though I mumble about my 39 articles, and the service of other divinities, Hudson is my God, and to him I will sacrifice this 20-pound note, if perhaps he will be propitious to me. Object not that there was a mixed motive in this worship of Hudson, that perhaps it was not worship at all. Undoubtedly there were two motives mixed, but both of them sincere, as often happens in worship. Transcendent admiration is defined as the origin of sacrifice, but also the hope of profit joins itself. If by sacrificing a goat, or the like trifle, to Supreme Jove, you can get Supreme Jove's favor, will not that, for one, be a good investment? Jove is sacrificed to, and worshipped, from transcendent admiration, but also, in part, men of practical nature worship him as pumps are primed. Give him a little water, that you may get from him a river. O God like Hudson, O God recognizing England, why was not the partly anthropomorphous pyramid of copper cast, then, and set upon the pinnacle of England, that all men might have seen it, and the sooner got to understand these things? The 25,000-pound oblation lay upon the altar at the bank. This monstrous copper Vishnu of the scrip ages might have been revealed to men, and was not. Unexpected obstacles occurred. In fact, there rose from the general English soul, lying dumb and infinitely bewildered, but not yet altogether dead, poor wretch, such a growth of inarticulate amazement, at this unexpected Hudson apotheosis, alarmed the pious worshipper, and their copper pyramid remains unrealized, not to be realized to all eternity now, or at least not till chaos come again, and the ancient mud gods have dominion. The ne plus ultra of statue building was within sight, but it was not attained, it was to be forever unattainable. If the world were not properly anarchic, this question, who shall have a statue, would be one of the greatest and most solemn for it. Who is to have a statue? Means, whom shall we consecrate and set apart as one of our sacred men? Sacred, that all men may see him, be reminded of him, and, by new example added to old perpetual precept, be taught what is real worth in man. Whom do you wish us to resemble? Him you set on a high column, that all men, looking on it, may be continually apprised of the duty you expect from them. What man to set there, and what man to refuse forevermore the leave to be set there? This, if a country were not anarchic as we say, ruleless, given up to the rule of chaos, in the primordial fibers of its being, would be a great question for a country. And to the parties themselves, lightly as they set about it, the question is rather great. Whom shall I honor, whom shall I refuse to honor? If a man have any precious thing in him at all, certainly the most precious of all the gifts he can offer is his approbation, his reverence to another man. This is his very soul, this fealty which he swears to another, his personality itself, with whatever it has of eternal and divine, he bends here in reverence before another. Not lightly while a man give this, if he is still a man. If he is no longer a man, but a greedy blind two-footed animal, without soul, except what saves him the expense of salt and keeps his body with its appetites from putrefying, alas, if he is nothing now but a human money-bag and meat trough, it is different. In that case his reverence is worth so many pounds sterling, and these, like a gentleman, he will give willingly. Hence the British statues, such a populace of them as we see. British statues, and some other more important things. Alas, of how many unveracities, of what a world of irreverence, of sordid debasement, and death in trespasses and sins, is this light unveracious bestowal of one's approbation the fatal outcome. Fatal in its origin, in its developments and thousandfold results so fatal. It is the poison of the universal upistry, under which all human interests, in these bad ages, lie writhing as if in the last struggle of death. Street barricades rise for that reason, and counterfeit kings have to shave off their whiskers, and fly like coiners, and it is a world gone mad in misery bestowing its approbation wrong. Give every man the meed of honor he has merited, you have the ideal world of poets, hierarchy of beneficences, your noblest man at the summit of affairs, and in every place the due gradation of the fittest for that place, a maximum of wisdom works and administers, followed, as is inevitable, by a maximum of success. It is a world such as the idle poets dream of, such as the active poets, the heroic and the true of men, are incessantly toiling to achieve, and more realize. Achieved, realized, it never can be, striven after, and approximated to, it must forever be, woe to us if at any time it be not. Other aim in this earth we have none. Renounce such aim as vain and hopeless, reject it altogether, what more have you to reject? You have renounced fealty to nature and its almighty maker, you have said practically. We can flourish very well without minding nature and her ordinances, perhaps nature and the Almighty, what are they? A phantasm of the brain of priests, and of some chimerical persons that write books? Hold! Shriek others wildly, you incendiary infidels, you should be quiet infidels, and believe. Haven't we a church? Don't we keep a church, this long while, best behaved of churches, which meddles with nobody, assiduously grinding its organs, reading its liturgies, homiletics, and excellent old moral horn books, so patiently as church never did? Can't we doff our hat to it, even look in upon it occasionally, on a wet Sunday, and so, at the trifling charge of a few millions annually, serve both God and the devil? Fools, you should be quiet infidels, and believe. To give our approval or right, alas, to do every one of us what lies in him, that the honorable man everywhere, and he only have honor, that the able man everywhere be put into the place which is fit for him, which is his by eternal right, is not this the sum of all social morality for every citizen of this world? This one duty perfectly done, what more could the world have done for it? The world in all departments and aspects of it were a perfect world, everywhere administered by the best wisdom discernible in it, everywhere enjoying the exact maximum of success and felicity possible for it. Imperfectly and not perfectly done, we know this duty must always be. Not done at all, no longer remembered as a thing which God and nature and the eternal voices do require to be done, alas, we see too well what kind of a world that ultimately makes for us. A world no longer habitable for quiet persons, a world which in these sad days is bursting into street barricades. And pretty rapidly turning out its honored men, as intrusive dogs are turned out, with a kettle tied to their tail. To kings, kaisers, spiritual papas, and holy fathers, there is universal apology. Depart thou, go thou to the Father of thee. In a huge world voice of mob musketry and sooty execration, uglier than any ever heard before. Who's to have a statue? The English, at present, answer this question in a very offhand manner. So far as I can ascertain the method they have, it is somewhat as follows. Of course, among the many idle persons to whom an unfortunate world has given money and no work to do, there must be with or without wisdom, without, for most part, a most brisk demand for work. Work to do is very desirable, for those that have only money and not work. Alas, one cannot buy sleep in the market, said the rich farmer general. Alas, one cannot buy work there, work, which is still more indispensable. One of these unfortunates with money and no work, whose haunts lie in the dilettante line, among artists' studios, picture sales, and the like regions, an inane kingdom much frequented by the inane in these times, him it strikes, in some inspired moment, that if a public subscription for a statue to somebody could be started, good results would follow. Perhaps some artist to whom he is Maecenas, might be got to do the statue, at all events there would be extensive work and stir going on, whereby the inspired dilettante, for his own share, might get upon committees, see himself named in the newspapers, might assist in innumerable consultations, open utterances of speech and balderdash, and on the whole, be comfortably present, for years to come, at something of the nature of a house on fire, house innocuously, nay beneficently on fire, a very Goshen to an idle man with money in his pocket. This is the germ of the idea, now make your idea an action. Think of a proper somebody. Almost anybody much heard of in the newspapers, and never yet convicted of felony, a conspicuous commander-in-chief, duke no matter whether of Wellington or of York, successful stump orator, political intriguer, lawyer that has made £200,000, scrip dealer that has made 200,000, anybody of a large class, we are not particular, he will be your proper somebody. You are then to get a brother idler or two to unite his £20 note to yours, the fire is kindled, smoke rises through the editorial columns, the fire, if you blow it, will break into flame, and become a comfortable house on fire for you, solacing the general idle soul, for years to come, and issuing in a big hulk of Corinthian brass, and a notable instance of hero worship, by and by. Such I take to be the origin of that extraordinary population of brazen and other images which at present dominate the marketplaces of towns, and solicit worship from the English people. The ugliest images, and to the strangest case of persons, ever set up in this world. Do you call these demigods? England must be dreadfully off for demigods. My friend, I will not do the smallest stroke of worship to them. 1 in 1,000 I will snatch out of bad company, if I ever can, the other 999 I will with pious joy, in a like case, reduce to the state of broken metal again, and veil forever from all men. As warming pans, as cheap brass candlesticks, men will get good of this metal, as devotionary images in such form, evil only. These are not heroes, gods, or demigods, and it is a horrible idolatry, if you knew it, to set them up as such. Are these your pattern men? Great men? They are your lucky, or unlucky, adventurers swollen big. Paltry adventurers for most part, worthy of no worship, and incapable forever of getting any, except from the soul consecrated to flunkeyism. Will a man's soul worship that, think you? Never, if you fashioned him of solid gold, big as Benjamin, no heart of a man would ever look upon him except with sorrow and despair. To the flunky heart alone is he, was he or can he at any time be, a thing to look upon with upturned eyes of transcendent admiration, worship or worship so called. He, you unfortunate fools, he is not the one we want to be kept in mind of, not he at all by any means. To him in his memory, if you had not been unfortunate and blockheads, you would have sunk a coal shaft rather than raised a column. Deep coal shaft, there to bury him in his memory, that men may never speak or hear of him more, not a high column to admonish all men that they should try to resemble him. Of the sculptural talent manifest in these brazen images I say nothing, though much were to be said. For indeed, if there is no talent displayed in them but a perverse one, are we not to consider it a happiness, in that strange case? This big swollen gluttonous hapless spiritual Daniel Lambert, deserved a coal shaft from his brother mortals, let at least his column be ugly, nevertheless ugly columns and images are, in themselves, a real evil. They too preach ugliness after their sort, and have a certain effect, the whole of which is bad. They sanction and consecrate artistic botching, pretentious futility, and the horrible doctrine that this universe is Cockney nightmare, which no creature ought for a moment to believe, or listen to. In brief, they encourage an already ugly population to become in 1,000 ways uglier. They too, for their ugliness, did not the infinitely deeper ugliness of the thing they commemorate absorb all consideration of that, would deserve, and do in fact incessantly solicit, abolition from the sight of men. What good in the aesthetic, the moral, social or any human point of view, we are ever to get of these brazen images now peopling our chief cities and their marketplaces, it is impossible to specify. Evil enough we, consciously or unconsciously, get of them. No soul looks upon them approvingly or even indifferently without damage, all the deadlier the less he knows of it. Simple souls they corrupt in the sources of their spiritual being, wise souls, obliged to look on them, look with some feeling of anger and just abhorrence, which is itself a mischief to a peaceable man. Good will never be got of these brazen images in their present form. Of what use, till once broken up and melted into warming pans, they can ever be to gods or men, I own I cannot see. Gods and men demand that this, which is their sure ultimate destiny, should so soon as possible be realized. It is tragically evident to me, our first want, which includes all wants, is that of a new real aristocracy of fact, instead of the extinct imaginary one of title, which the anarchic world is everywhere rebelling against. But if it is from popular suffrage that we are to look for such a blessing, is not this extraordinary populace of British statues, which now dominates our marketplaces, one of the saddest omens that ever was? Suffrage announces to us, nothing doubting, here are your real demigods and heroic men, ye famous British people. Here are brazen and other images worthy once more of some worship. This is the new aristocracy I have chosen, and would choose, for you. That is suffrage's opinion. To me this populace of British statues rises aloft over the chaos of our affairs like the living symbol and consummate flower of said chaos, and silently speaks the mournfulest prophecy. Perhaps as strange a pantheon of brass gods as was ever got together in this world. They stand there, poor wretches, gradually rusting in the sooty rain, black and dismal, when one thinks of them in some haggard mood of the imagination, like a set of grisly undertakers come to bury the dead spiritualisms of mankind. There stand they, in all weathers, indicating to the British population such a heaven and such an earth as probably no population ever had before. In the social, political, religious, artistic, and other provinces of our affairs, they point towards depths of prostrate abasement which no man's thought has yet sounded. Let us timidly glance thitherward a little, gaze, for moments, into those abysses of spiritual death, which, if we cannot one day sound them and subdue them, will engulf us all. And first as to this recipe of popular election. Hudson the railway king, if popular election be the rule, seems to me by far the most authentic king that has been elected by the people, so as almost none other is or was. Hudson solicited no vote, his votes were silent voluntary ones not liable to be false. He did a thing which men found, in their inarticulate hearts, to be worthy of paying money for, and they paid it. What the desire of every heart was, Hudson had or seemed to have produced scrip out of which profit could be made. They voted for him by purchasing his scrip with a profit to him. Every vote was the spontaneous product of those men's deepest insights and most practical convictions about Hudson and themselves in this universe. I say, it was not a spoken vote, but a silently acted one, a vote for once incapable of being insincere. What their appetites, intelligences, stupidities, and pruriences had taught these men, they authentically told you there. I beg you to mark that well. Not by all the ballot boxes in nature could you have hoped to get, with such exactness, from these men what the deepest inarticulate voice of the gods and of the demons in them was, as by this their spontaneous purchase of scrip. It is the ultimate rectified quintessence of these men's votes, the distillation of their very souls, the sincerest sincerity that was in them. Without gratitude to Hudson, or even without thought of him, they raised Hudson to his bad eminence, not by their voice given once at some hustings under the influence of balderdash and beer, but by the thought of their heart, by the inarticulate, indisputable dictate of their whole being. Hudson inquired of England, "What precious thing can I do for you, O enlightened countrymen? What may be the value to you, by popular election, of this stroke of work that lies in me?" Popular election, with universal, with household and other suffrage, free as air, deep as life and death, free and deep as spoken suffrage never was or could be, has answered, £1 to such and such amount, that is the apparent value of thy stroke of work to us, blockheads as we are. Real value differs from apparent to a frightful extent in this world, try it by what suffrage you will. Hudson's value as a demigod being what it was, his value as a maker of railways shall hardly concern us here. What Hudson's real worth to mankind the matter of railways might be, I cannot pretend to say. Fact knows it to the uttermost fraction, and will pay it him, yet men differ widely in opinion, and in general do not in the least know. From my own private observation and conjecture, I should say, trifling if any worth. Much as we love railways, there is one thing undeniable: railways are shifting all towns of Britain into new places. No town will stand where it did, and nobody can tell for a long while yet where it will stand. This is an unexpected and indeed most disastrous result. I perceive, railways have set all the towns of Britain a-dancing. Reading is coming up to London, Basingstoke is going down to Gosport or Southampton, Dumfries to Liverpool and Glasgow, while at Crewe and other points, I see new ganglions of human population establishing themselves, and the prophecy of metallurgic cities which were not heard of before. Reading, Basingstoke and the rest, the unfortunate towns, subscribed money to get railways, and it proves to be for cutting their own throats. Their business has gone elsewhither, and they cannot stay behind their business. They are set a-dancing, as I said, confusedly waltzing, in a state of progressive dissolution, towards the four winds, and know not where the end of the death dance will be for them, in what point of space they will be allowed to rebuild themselves. That is their sad case. And what an affair it is in each of the shops and houses of those towns, thus silently bleeding to death, or what we call dancing away to other points of the British territory, how Joplin of Reading, who had anchored himself in that pheasant place, and fondly hoping to live by upholstery and paper hanging, had wedded and made friends there, awakens some morning, and finds that his trade has flitted away. Here it is not any longer, it is gone to London, to Bristol. Whither has it gone? Joplin knows not whither, knows and sees only that gone it is, and that he by preternatural sagacity must send it out again, follow it over the world, and catch it again, or else die. Sad news for Joplin, indeed I fear, should his sagacity be too inconsiderable, he is not unlikely to break his heart, or take to drinking in these inextricable circumstances. And it is the history, more or less, in every town, house, shop and industrial dwelling place of the British Empire at this moment, and the cipher of afflicted Joplins, and the amount of private distress, uncertainty, discontent, and withal of revolutionary movement created hereby, is tragical to think of. This is revolutionary movement with a witness, revolution brought home to everybody's hearth and money safe and heart and stomach. Which miserable result, with so many others from the same source, what method was there of avoiding or indefinitely mitigating? This surely, as the beginning of all, that you had made your railways not in haste, that, at least, you had spread the huge process, sure to alter all men's mutual position and relations, over a reasonable breadth of time. For all manner of reasons, how much could one have wished that the making of our British railways had gone on with deliberation, that these great works had made themselves not in 5 years but in 55. Hudson's worth to railways, I think, will mainly resolve itself into this, that he carried them to completion within the former short limit of time, that he got them made, in extremely improper direction I am told, and surely with endless confusion to the innumerable passive Joplins, and likewise to the numerous active scrip holders, a widespread class, once rich, now coinless, hastily in 5 years, not deliberately in 55. His worth to railways. His worth, I take it, to English railways, much more to Englishmen, will turn out to be extremely inconsiderable, to be incalculable damage rather. Foolish railway people gave him 2 millions, and thought it not enough without a statue to boot. But fact thought, and is now audible saying, far otherwise. Rhadamanthus, had you been able to consult him, would in no wise have given this man £25,000 for a statue. What if Rhadamanthus doomed him rather, let us say, to ride in express trains, no whither, for 25 eons, or to hang in heaven as a locomotive constellation, and be assigned forever? Fact and suffrage, what a discrepancy. Fact decided for some coal shaft such as we describe. Suffrage decides for such a column. Suffrage, having money in its pocket, carries it hollow, for the moment. And so there is Realist Majesty exalted far above the chimney pots, with a potential copper likeness, £25,000 worth of copper over and above, and a king properly belonging only to this epoch. That there are greedy blockheads in huge majority, and all epochs, is certain, but that any sane mortal should think of counting their heads to ascertain who or what is to be king, this is a little peculiar. All democratic men, and members of the suffrage movement, it appears to me, are called upon to think seriously, with a seriousness approaching to despair, of these things. Jefferson Brick, the American editor, twitted me with the multifarious patented anomalies of overgrown worthless dukes, bishops of Durham, etc. which poor English society at present labors under, and is made a solecism by. To which what answer could I make, except, that surely our patented anomalies were some of them extremely ugly, and yet, alas, that they were not the ugliest. I said, have not you also overgrown anomalous dukes after a sort, appointed not by patent? Overgrown monsters of wealth, namely, who have made money by dealing in cotton, dealing in bacon, daubing scrip, digging metal in California, who are become glittering man mountains filled with gold and preciosities, revered by the surrounding flunkies, invested with the real powers of sovereignty, and placidly admitted by all men, as if nature and heaven had so appointed it, to be in a sense godlike, to be royal, and fit to shine in the firmament, though their real worth is, what? Brick, do you know where human creatures reach the supreme of ugliness in idols? It were hard to know. We can say only, all idols have to tumble, and the hugest of them with the heaviest fall. That is our chief comfort, in America as here. The idol of Somnath, a mere mass of coarse crockery not worth 5 shillings of anybody's money, sat like a great staring god, with 2 diamonds for eyes, worshipped by the neighboring black populations, a terror and divine mystery to all mortals, till its day came. Till at last, victorious in the name of Allah, the commander of the faithful, riding up with grim battle axe and heart full of Muslim fire, took the liberty to smite once, with light force and rage, said ugly mass of idolatrous crockery, which thereupon shivered, with unmelodious crash and jingle, into a heap of ugly potsherds, yielding from its belly half a wagon load of gold coins. You can read it in Gibbon, probably, in Lord Ellenborough. The gold coins, the diamond eyes, and other valuable extrinsic parts were carefully picked up by the faithful. Confused jingle of intrinsic potsherds was left lying, and the idol of Somnath, once showing what it was, had suddenly come to a conclusion. Thus end all idols, and intrinsically worthless man mountains never so illuminated with diamonds, and filled with precious metals, and tremulously worshipped by the neighboring flunky populations black or white, even thus, sooner or later, without fail, and are shot hastily, as a heap of potsherds, into the highway, to be crunched under wagon wheels, and do macadam a little service, being clearly abolished as gods, and hidden from man's recognition, in that or other capacities, forever and a day. You do not sufficiently bethink you, my Republican friend. Our ugliest anomalies are done by universal suffrage, not by patent. The express nonsense of old feudalism, even now, in its dotage is as nothing to the involuntary nonsense of modern anarchy called freedom, republicanism, and other fine names, which expresses itself by supply and demand. Consider it a little. The bishop of our diocese is to me an incredible man, and has, I will grant you, very much more money than you or I would now give him for his work. One does not even read those charges of his, much preferring speech which is articulate. In fact, being intent on a quiet life, you generally keep on the other side of the hedge from him, and strictly leave him to his own fate. Not a credible man, perhaps not quite a safe man to be concerned with? But what think you of the Bobbus of Houndsditch of our parts? He, sausage maker on the great scale, knows the art of cutting fat bacon, and exposing it seasoned with grey pepper to advantage. Better than any other man he knows this art, and I take the liberty to say it is a poor one. Well, the bishop has an income of £5,000 appointed him for his work, and Bobbus, to such a length has he now pushed the trade in sausages, gains from the universal suffrage of men's souls and stomachs 10,000 a year by it. A poor art, this of Bobbis's, I say, and worth no such recompense. For it is not even good sausages he makes, but only extremely vendible ones, the cunning dog. Judges pronounce his sausages bad, and at the cheap price even dear, and finer palates, it is whispered, have detected alarming symptoms of horseflesh, or worse, under this cunningly devised grey pepper spice of his, so that for the world I would not eat one of his sausages, nor would you. You perceive he is not an excellent honest sausage maker, but a dishonest cunning and scandalous sausage maker, worth, if he could get his deserts, who shall say what? Probably certain shillings a week, say 40, possibly one shudders to think, a long round in the treadmill, and stripes instead of shillings. And yet what he gets, I tell you, from universal suffrage and the unshackled ne plus ultra republican justice of mankind, is twice the income of that anomalous bishop you were talking of. The bishop I for my part do much prefer to Bobbis. The bishop has human sense and breeding of various kinds, considerable knowledge of Greek, if you should ever want the like of that, knowledge of many things, and speaks the English language in a grammatical manner. He is bred to courtesy, to dignified composure, as to a second nature, a gentleman every fibre of him, which of itself is something very considerable. The bishop does really diffuse round him an influence of decorum, courteous patience, solid adherence to what is settled, teaches practically the necessity of burning one's own smoke, and does practically in his own case burn said smoke, making lambent flame and mild illumination out of it, for the good of men in several particulars. While Bobbis, for twice the annual money, brings sausages, possibly of horseflesh, cheaper to market than another, brick, if you will reflect, it is not aristocratic England, it is the united posterity of Adam who are grown, in some essential respects, stupider than barber's blocks. Barber's blocks would at least say nothing, and not elevate, by their universal suffrages, an unfortunate Bobbis to that bad height. Alas, if such, not in their loose tongues, but in their hearts, is men's way of judging about social worth, what kind of new aristocracy will the inconceivablest perfection of spoken suffrage ever yield us? Suffrage, I perceive well, has quite other things in store for us. We need not torment poor suffrage for this thing. Our intermittent friend says once, men do not seem to be aware that this their universal ousting of unjust, incapable and in fact imaginary governors, is to issue in the attainment of governors who have a right and a capacity to govern. Far different from that is the issue men contemplate in their present revolutionary operations. Their universal notion now is, that we shall henceforth do without governors, that we have got to a new epoch in human progress, in which governing is entirely a superfluity, and the attempt at doing it is an offense, think several. By that admirable invention of the constitutional parliament, first struck out in England, and now at length hotly striven for and zealously imitated in all European countries, the task of government, any task there may still be, is done to our hand. Perfect your parliament, cry all men, apply the ballot box and universal suffrage. The admirablest method ever imagined of counting heads and gathering indubitable votes, you will thus gather the vote, vox or voice, of all the two-legged animals without feathers in your dominion. What they think is what the gods think, is it not? And this you shall go and do. Whereby, beyond dispute, your governor's task is immensely simplified, and indeed the chief thing you can now require of your governor is that he carefully preserve his good humor, and do a handsome man or nothing, or some pleasant fugal motions only. Is not this a machine marking new epochs in the progress of discovery? Machine for doing government too, as we now do all things by machinery. Only keep your free presses, ballot boxes, upright shafts and cogwork in an oiled unobstructed condition. Motive power of popular wind will do the rest. Here verily is a mill that beats Birmingham hollow, and marks new epochs with a witness. What a hopper this! Reap from all fields whatsoever you find standing, thistledowns, dockseed, hemlock seed, wheat, rye, tumble all into the hopper, see, in soft blissful continuous stream, meal shall daily issue for you, and the bread of life to mankind be sure. The aim of all reformers parliamentary and other, is still defined by them as just legislation, just laws with which definition who can quarrel. They will no have class legislation, which is a dreadfully bad thing, but all classes legislation, I suppose, which is the right thing. Sure enough, just laws are an excellent attainment, the first condition of all prosperity for human creatures, but few reflect how extremely difficult such attainment is. Alas, could we once get laws which were just, that is to say, which were the clear transcript of the divine laws of the universe itself, so that each man were incessantly admonished, under strict penalties, by all men, to walk as the eternal Maker had prescribed, and he alone received honor whom the Maker had made honorable, and whom the Maker had made disgraceful. Disgrace, alas, were not here the very aristocracy we seek? A new veritable hierarchy of heaven, approximately such in very truth, bringing earth nearer and nearer to the blessed law of heaven. Heroic me, the scent of heaven, once more bore rule, and on the throne of kings there sat splendent, not King Hudson, or King Popinjay, but the bravest of existing men, and on the gibbet there swing as a tragic pendulum, admonitory to earth in the name of heaven, not some insignificant, abject, necessitous outcast, who had violently, in his extreme misery and darkness, stolen a leg of mutton, but veritably the supreme scoundrel of the Commonwealth, who in his insatiable greed and bottomless atrocity had long, hoodwinking the poor world, gone himself and led multitudes to go, in the ways of gilded human baseness, seeking temporary profit, scrip, first-class claret, social honor and the like small ware, where only eternal loss was possible, and who now, stripped of all his gildings and cunningly devised speciosities, swung there an ignominious detected scoundrel, testifying aloud to all the earth, be not scoundrels, not even gilt scoundrels, any one of you, for God, and not the devil, is verily king, and this is where it ends, if even this be the end of it. O heaven, O earth, what an attainment were here, could we but hope to see it. Reformed Parliament, People's League, Hume Cobden agitation, tremendous cheers, new battles of Naseby, French Revolution, and horrors of French Revolution, all things were cheap and light to the attainment of this. For this were in fact the millennium, and indeed nothing less than this can be it. But I say it is dreadfully difficult to attain. And though class legislation is not it, yet, alas, neither is all class legislation in the least certain to be it. All classes, if they happen not to be wise, heroic classes, how, by the cunningest jumbling of them tether, will you ever get a wisdom or heroism out of them? Once more let me remind you, it is impossible forever. Unwisdom, contradiction to the gods, how, from the mere vamping together of hostile voracities and opacities, never so dexterously or copiously combined, can or could you expect anything else? Can any man bring a clean thing out of an unclean? No man. Voracities and opacities, blended together in never such cunningly devised proportions, will not yield noblenesses and illuminations, they cannot do it. Parliamentary Reform, extension of the suffrage? Good heavens, how by the mere enlargement of your circle of ingredients, by the mere flinging in of new opacities and voracities, will you have a better chance to distill a wisdom from that foul cauldron, which is merely bigger, not by hypothesis better? You will have a better chance to distill zero from it, evil elements from all sides, now more completely extinguishing one another so that mutual destruction, like that of the Kilkenny cats, a parliament which produces parliamentary eloquence only, and no social guidance, either bad or good, will be the issue, as we now in these years sorrowfully see. Universal suffrage, what a scheme to substitute for the revelation of God's eternal law, the official declaration of the account of heads. It is as if men had abdicated their right to attempt holy resignation, had agreed to give it up, and take temporary peace and good agreement as a substitute. In all departments of our affairs it is so, literary, moral, political, social, and in all of them it is and remains eternally wrong. In every department, literary, moral, political, social, the man that pretends to have what is angrily called a choice of his own, which will mean at least some remnant of a feeling in him that nature and fact do still claim a choice of their own, and are like to make it good yet, such man is felt as a kind of interloper and dissocial person, who obstructs the harmony of affairs, and is out of keeping with the universal suffrage arrangement that has been entered upon. Why not decide it by dice? Universal suffrage for your oracle is equivalent to flat despair of answer. Set up such oracle, you proclaim to all men, friends, there is in nature no answer to your question, and you don't believe in dice. Try to esteem this oracle a divine one, and be thankful that you can thereby keep the peace, and go with an answer from the shrine of chaotic chance. Peace is good, but woe to the cowardly caitiff of a man, or collection of cowardly caitiffs, styling themselves nation, that will have peace on these terms. They will save their ignoble skin at the expense of their eternal loyalty to the highest God. Peace? Better war to the knife, war till we all die, than such a peace. Reject it, my friend, I advise thee, silently swear by God above, that, on earth below, thou for thy part never wilt accept it. Be it forever far from us, my poor scattered friends. Let us fly to the rocks rather, and silently appealing to the eternal heaven, await an hour which is full surely coming, when we too shall have grown to a respectable company of poor men, authorized to rally, and with celestial lightning, and with terrestrial steel and such good weapons as there may be, spend all our blood upon it. After all, why was not the Hudson testimonial completed? As Moses lifted up the brazen serpent in the wilderness, why was not Hudson's statue lifted up? Once more I say, it might have done us good. Thitherto, in a sense, poison-stricken mortals might have looked, and found some healing. For many reasons, this alarming populace of British statues wanted to have its chief. The liveliest type of choice by suffrage ever given. The consummate flower of universal anarchy in the Commonwealth, and in the hearts of men, was not this statue such a flower, or do we look for one more perfect and consummate? Of social hierarchies, and religions the parent of these, why speak, in presence of social anarchy such as is here symbolized? The apotheosis of Hudson beckons to still deeper gulfs on the religious side of our affairs, into which one shudders to look down. For the eye rests only on the blackness of darkness, and, shrunk to hissing whispers, inaudible except to the finer ear, come moanings of the everlasting tempest, and tones of Altiguai. Nor is a certain vertigo quite absent from the strongest heads, a mad impulse to take the leap, then, and dwell with eternal death, since it seems to be the rule at present. One hurried glance or two, holding well by what parapets there still are, and then let us hasten to be gone. Worship, what we call human religion, has undergone various phases in the history of mankind. To the primitive man all forces of nature were divine, either for propitiation or for admiration. Many things, and in a sense all things, demanded worship from him. But especially the noble human soul was divine to him, and announced, as it ever does, with direct impressiveness the inspiration of the highest, demanding worship from the primitive man. Whereby, as has been explained elsewhere, this latter form of worship, hero worship as we call it, did, among the ancient peoples, attract and subdue to itself all other forms of human worship, irradiating them all with its own perennial worth, which indeed is all the worth they had, or that any worship can have. Human worship everywhere, so far as there lay any worth in it, was of the nature of a hero worship. This universe holy, this temporary flame image of the eternal, was one beautiful and terrible energy of heroisms, presided over by a divine nobleness or infinite hero. Divine nobleness forever friendly to the noble, forever hostile to the ignoble, all manner of moral rules, and well sanctioned too, flowed naturally out of this primeval intuition into nature, which, I believe, is still the true fountain of moral rules, though a much forgotten one at present, and indeed it seems to be the one unchangeable, eternally indubitable intuition into nature we have yet heard of in these parts. To the primitive man, whether he looked at moral rule, or even at physical fact, there was nothing not divine. Flame was the god Loki, etc. This visible universe was wholly the vesture of an invisible infinite, every event that occurred in it a symbol of the immediate presence of God. Which it intrinsically is and forever will be, let poor stupid mortals remember or forget it. The difference is, not that God has withdrawn, but that men's minds have fallen hebetated, stupid, that their hearts are dead, awakening only to some life about mealtime and cookery time, and their eyes are grown dim, blinkered, a kind of horn eyes like those of owls, available chiefly for catching mice. Most excellent Smithy Trough, it is a long time since I have stopped short in admiring your stupendous railway miracles. I was obliged to strike work, and cease admiring in that direction. Very stupendous indeed, considerable improvement in old roadways and wheel and axle carriages, velocity unexpectedly great, distances attainable ditto, all this is undeniable. But, alas, all this is still small dear for me, my excellent Smithy Trough, truly nothing more than an unexpected take of mice for the owlish part of you and me. The distances, you unfortunate Fitz? The distances of London to Aberdeen, to Ostend, to Vienna, are still infinitely inadequate to me. Will you teach me the winged flight through immensity, up to the throne dark with excess of bright? You unfortunate, you grin as an ape would at such a question, you do not know that unless you can reach thither in some effectual most veritable sense, you are a lost Smithy Trough, doomed to heal his death realm in the abyss where mere brutes are buried. I do not want cheaper cotton, swifter railways, I want what Novalis calls God, freedom, immortality. Will swift railways, and sacrifices to Hudson, help me towards that? As propitiation or as admiration, worship still continues among men, will always continue, and the phase it has at ally given epoch may be taken as the ruling phenomenon which determines all others in that epoch. If Odin, who invented runes, or literatures, and rhythmic logical speech, and taught men to despise death, is worshipped in one epoch, and if Hudson, who conquered railway directors, and taught men to become suddenly rich by scrip, is worshipped in another, the characters of these two epochs must differ a good deal. Nay, the worst of some epochs is, they have along with their real worship an imaginary, and are conscious only of the latter as worship. They keep a set of gods or fetishes, reckoned respectable to which they mumble prayers, asking themselves and others triumphantly, are not these respectable gods? And all the while their real worship, or heart's love and admiration, which alone is worship, concentrates itself on quite other gods and fetishes, on Hudsons and scrips, for instance. Thus is the miserable epoch rendered twice and tenfold miserable, and in a manner lost beyond redemption, having superadded to its stupid idolatries, and brutish forgettings of the true God, which are leading it down daily towards ruin, an immense hypocrisy which is the quintessence of all idolatries and misbeliefs and unbeliefs, and taken refuge under that, as under a thing safe. Europe generally has lain there a long time, England I think for about 200 years, spinning certain cottons notably the while, and thinking it all right, which it was very far from being. But the time of accounts, slowly advancing, has arrived at last for Europe, and is knocking at the door of England too, and it will be seen whether universal make-belief can be the rule in English or human things, whether respectable Hebrew and other fetishes, combined with real worship of Yorkshire and other script, will answer the purpose here below or not. It is certain, whatever gods or fetishes a man may have about him, and pay tithes to, and mumble prayers to, the real religion that is in him is his practical hero worship. Whom or what do you in your very soul admire, and strive to imitate and emulate? Is it God's servant or the devil's? Clearly this is the whole question. There is no other religion in the man which can be of the slightest consequence in comparison. Theologies, doxologies, orthodoxies, heterodoxies, are not of moment except as subsidiary towards a good issue in this. If they help well in it, they are good; if not well or at all, they are nothing or bad. This also is certain: nations that do their hero worship well are blessed and victorious, nations that do it ill are accursed, and in all fibers of their business grow daily more so, till their miserable afflictive and offensive situation becomes a last unendurable to heaven and to earth, and the so-called nation, now an unhappy populace of misbelievers, miscreants was the old name, bursts into revolutionary tumult, and either reforms or else annihilates itself. How otherwise? Know whom to honor and emulate and follow, know whom to dishonor and avoid, and coerce under, hatches, as a foul rebellious thing. This is all the law and all the prophets. All conceivable evangels, Bibles, homiletics, liturgies and litanies, and temporal and spiritual law books for a man or a people, issue practically there. Be right in that, essentially you are not wrong in anything. You read this universe tolerably aright, and are in the way to interpret well what the will of its maker is. Be wrong in that, had you liturgies the recommendablest in nature, and bodies of divinity as big as an Indiaman, it helps you not a whit. You are wrong in all things. How in anything can you be right? You read this universe in the inmost meaning of it wrong. Gross idolatrous misbelief is what I have to recognize in you, and, superadded, such a faith in the saving virtue of that deadliest of vices, hypocrisy, as no people ever had before. Beautiful recommendable liturgies? Your liturgies, the recommendablest in nature, are to me alarming and distressing, a turning of the Kamak prayer mill, not my way of praying. This immense asthmatic spiritual hurdy-gurdy, issuing practically in a set of demigods like Hudson, what is the good of it? Why will you keep grinding it under poor men's windows? Since Hudson is Vishnu, let the Shastras and Vedas be conformable to him. Why chant divine psalms which belong to a different dispensation, and are now become idle and far worse? Not melodious to me, such a chant, in such a time. The sound of it, if you are not yet quite dead to spiritual sounds, is frightful and bodeful. I say, this litany of yours, were the wretched populace and population never so unanimous and loud in it, is a thing no God can hear. Your miserable religion, as you call it, is an idolatry of the name of mumbo-jumbo, and I would advise you to discontinue it rather. You are infidels, persons without faith, not believing what is true but what is untrue, miscreants, as the old fathers well called you, appointed to inevitably, unless you can repent and alter soon, of which I see no symptoms, to a fearful doom. It was always so, you indolently say. No, friend Heaviside. It was not always so, and even till lately was never so, and I would much recommend you to sweep that foolish notion, which you often din at me, and always keep about you as one of your main consolations, quite out of your head. Once the notion was my own too, I know the notion very well. And I will invite you to ask yourself in all ways, whether it is not possibly a rather torpid and poisonous, and likewise an altogether incorrect and delusive notion? Capable, I assure you, of being quite swept out of a man's head, and greatly needing to be so, if the man would do any reform, or other useful work, in this his day. Till such notion go about its business, there cannot even be the attempt towards reform. Not so much as the pulling down, and melting into warming pans, of those poor brazen representatives of anarchy can be accomplished, but they will stand there prophesying as now, here is the new aristocracy you want, down on your knees, ye Christian souls, O my friend, and after Hudson and the other idols have quite gone to warming pans, have you computed what agonistic centuries await us, before any new aristocracy worth calling by the name of real, can by likelihood prove attainable? From the stormful trampling down of sham human worth, and casting it with wrath and scorn into the melting pot, onward to the silent sad repentant recognition of real human worth, and the capability of again doing that some pious reverence, some reverence which were not practically worse than none. Have you measured what an interval is there? Centuries of desperate wrestle against earth and hell, on the part of all the brave men that are born. Too true this, though figuratively spoken. Perilous tempestuous struggle and pilgrimage, continual marching battle with the mud serpents of this earth and the demons of the pit, centuries of such a marching fight, continually along the edge of Red Republic, too, and the abyss, as brave men were not often called to in history before, and the brave men will not yet so much as gird on their harness. They sit indolently saying, it is already all as it can be, as it was wont to be, and universal suffrage and tremendous cheers will manage it. Collins's old peerage book, a dreadfully dull production, fills one with unspeakable reflections. Beyond doubt a most dull production, one of the darkest in the book kind ever realized by chaos and man's brain, and it is properly all we English have for a biographical dictionary, nay, if you think farther of it, for a national Bible. Friend Heaviside is much astonished, but I see what I mean here, and have long seen. Clear away the dust from your eyes, and you will ask this question: what is the Bible of a nation, the practically credited God's message to a nation? Is it not, beyond all else, the authentic biography of its heroic souls? This is the real record of the appearances of God in the history of a nation, this, which all men to the very marrow of their bones can believe, and which teaches all men what the nature of the universe, when you go to work in it, really is what the universe was thought to be in Judea and other places. This too may be very interesting to know. But what it is in England here where we live and have our work to do, that is the interesting point. The universe? McCrowdy answers. It is a huge dull cattle stall in St. Catherine's Wharf, with a few pleasant apartments upstairs for those that can make money. Make money, and don't bother about the universe. That is McCrowdy's notion, reckoned a quiet, innocent and rather wholesome notion just now, yet clearly fitter for a reflective pig than for a man, working continual damnation, therefore, however quiet it be, and indeed I perceive it is one of the damnablest notions that ever came into the head of any two-legged animal without feathers in this world. That is McCrowdy's Bible, his apology, poor fellow, for the want of a Bible. But how, among so many Shakespeares, and thinkers, and heroic singers, our national Bible should be in such a state, and how a poor dull bookseller should have been left, not to write in rhythmic coherency, worthy of a poet and of all our poets, but to shovel together, or indicate, in huge rubbish mountains incondite as chaos, the materials for writing such a book, of books for England. This is abundantly amazing to me, and I wish much it could duly amaze us all. Literature has no nobler task, in fact it has that one task, and except it be idle rope dancing, no other. The highest problem of literature, says Novalis, very justly, is the writing of a Bible. Nevertheless, among these dust mountains, with their antiquarian excerpts and sepulchral brasses, it is astonishing what strange fragments you do turn up, miraculous talismans to a reader that will think, windows through which an old sunk world, as yet all built upon veracity, and full of rugged nobleness, becomes visible, to the mute wonder of the modern mind. It struck me much, that of these ancient peerages a very great majority had visibly had authentic heroes for their founders, noble men, of whose worth no clear-sighted king could be in doubt, and that, in their descendants too, there did not cease a strain of heroism for some time, the peership generally dying out and disappearing, not long after that ceased. What a world, that old sunk one, real governors governing in it, shams not yet anywhere recognized as tolerable in it. A world whose practical president was not chaos with ballot boxes, whose outcome was not anarchy plus a street constable. In how high and true a sense, the Almighty with continual enforcement of his laws still presided there, and in all things as yet there was some degree of blessedness and nobleness there. One's heart is sore to think how far, how very far all this has vanished from us, how the very tradition of it has disappeared, and it has ceased to be credible, to seem desirable. Till the like of it return, yes, my constitutional friend, such is the sad fact, till the like of it, in new form, adapted to the new times, be again achieved by us, we are not properly a society at all, we are a lost gregarious horde, with kings of scrip on this hand, and famishing connaughts and distressed needlewomen on that, presided over by the anarch old. A lost horde, who, in bitter feeling of the intolerable injustice that presses upon all men, will not long be able to continue even gregarious, but will have to split into street barricades, and internecine battle with one another, and to fight, if wisdom for some new real peerage be not granted us, till we all die, mutually butchered, and so rest, so if not otherwise. Till the time of James I, I find that real heroic merit more or less was actually the origin of peerages, never, till towards the end of that bad reign were peerages bargained for, or bestowed on men palpably of no worth except their money or connection. But the evil practice, once begun, spread rapidly, and now the peerage book is what we see, a thing miraculous in the other extreme. A kind of Proteus flock, very curious to meet upon the lofty mountains, so many of them being natives of the deep. Our menagerie of live peers in Parliament is like that of our brazen statues in the marketplace. The selection seemingly is made much in the same way, and with the same degree of felicity, and sucks full accuracy and choice. Our one steady regulated supply is the class definable as supreme stump orators in the lawyer department. The class called Chancellors flows by something like fixed conduits towards the peerage. The rest, like our brazen statues, come by popular rule of thumb. Stump orators, supreme or other, are not beautiful to me in these days, but the immense power of lawyers among us is sufficiently intelligible. I perceive, it proceeds from two causes. First, they preside over the management and security of property, which is our God at present. They are thus properly our pontiffs, the highest priests we have. Then furthermore, they possess the talent most valued, that of the tongue, and seem to us the most gifted of our intelligences, thereby provoking a spontaneous loyalty and worship. What think you of a country whose kings go by genealogy, and are the descendants of successful lawyers? A poor weather-worn, tanned, curried, wind-dried human creature, called a chancellor, all or almost all gone to horsehair and officiality, the whole existence of him tanned, by long maceration, public exposure, tugging and manipulation, to the toughness of Yorkshire leather. Meseems I have seen a beautifuler man. Not a leather man would I by preference appoint to beget my kings. Not lovely to me as the leather species of men, to whose tan soul God's universe has become a jangling logic cockpit and little other. If indeed it have not become far less and worse, for the wretched tan chancellor, I am told, is usually acquainted with the art of lying too. Considerable part of his trade, as I have been informed, is the talent of lying in a way that cannot be laid hold of, a dreadful trick to learn. Out of such a man there cannot be expected much revelation of the beautiful, I should say. O Bull, were I in your place, I would try either to get other peers or else to abolish the concern, which latter indeed, by your acquiescence in such nominations, and by many other symptoms, I judge to be unconsciously your fixed intention. You have seen many chancellors made peers in these late generations, Mr. Bull. And now tell me, which was the chancellor you did really love or honor, to any remarkable degree? Alas, you never within authentic memory loved any of them. You couldn't, no man could. You lazily stared with some semblance of admiration at the big wig, huge purse, reputation for divine talent, and sublime proficiency in the art of tongue fence, but to love him, that, Mr. Bull, was once for all a thing you could not manage. Who of the seed of Adam could? From the time of Chancellor Bacon downwards, and beyond that your chancellors are dark to you as the muftis of Constantinople, I challenge you to show me one chancellor for whom, had the wigs, purses, reputations etc. been peeled off him, who would have given his weight in Smithfield beef sinking awful. You unhappy Bull, governed by kings you have not the smallest regard for, wandering in an extinct world of wearisome, oppressive and expensive shadows, nothing real in it but the Smithfield beef, nothing preternatural in it but the Chartisms and threatened street barricades, and this not celestial but infernal. Sure enough, I find, O Heaviside, England once was a hierarchy, as every human society, not either dead or else hastening towards death, always is, but it has long ceased to be so to any tolerable degree of perfection, and is now, by its Hudson and other testimonials, testifying in a silent way to the thoughtful, what otherwise, by its thousandfold anarchic depravities, miseries, God-forgettings and open devil worships it has long loudly taught them to expect, that we are now wending towards the culmination in this particular. That to the modern English populations, supreme hero and supreme scoundrel are, perhaps as nearly as is possible to human creatures, indistinguishable. That it is totally uncertain, perhaps even the odds against you, whether the figure whom said population mount to the place of honor, is not in nature and fact dishonorable, whether the man to whom they raise a column does not deserve a coalshaft. And in fine, poor devils, that their universal suffrage, as spoken, as acted, meditated, and imagined, universal suffrage, I do not say ballot boxed and cunningly constitutionalized, but boiled, distilled, digested, quintessenced, till you get into the very heart's heart of it, is, to the rational soul, except for stock exchange, and the like very humble practical purposes, worth express zero, or nearly so. I think probably as near zero as the unassisted human faculties and destinies ever came, or are like to come. Hierarchy? Oh heaven! If Chaos himself sat umpire, what better could he do? Here are a set of human demigods, as if chosen to his hand. Hierarchy with a vengeance, if instead of God, a vulpine beggarly Beelzebub or swollen Mammon were our supreme heroes or holy, this would be a hierarchy. I say if you want chaos for your master, adopt this, if you don't, I beg you make haste to adopt some other, for this is the broad way to him. The eternal anarch, with his old waggling addlehead full of mere windy rumor, and his old insatiable paunch full of mere hunger and indigestion tragically blended, and the hissing discord of all the four elements persuasively pleading to him, he, set to choose, would be apt to vote for such a set of demigods to you. As to the statues, I know they are but symptoms of anarchy. It is not they, it is the anarchy, that one is anxious to see abated. Remedy for the statues will be possible, and, as a small help, undoubtedly it too, in the meantime is desirable. Every symptom you drive in being a curtailment of the malady, by all means cure this statue building if you can. It will be one folly and misery less. Government is loath to interfere with the pursuits of any class of citizens, and oftenest looks on in silence while follies are committed. But government does interfere to prevent afflictive accumulations on the streets, malodorous or other unsanitary public procedures of an extensive sort, regulates gully drains, cesspools, prohibits the piling up of dung heaps, and is especially strict on the matter of indecent exposures. Wherever the health of the citizens is concerned, much more where their soul's health, and as it were their very salvation, is concerned, all governments that are not chimerical make haste to interfere. Now if dung heaps laid on the streets, afflictive to the mere nostrils, are a subject for interference, what, we ask, are high columns, raised by prurient stupidity and public delusion, to blockheads whose memory does in eternal fact deserve the sinking of a coal shaft rather? Give to every one what he deserves, what really is his, in all scenes and situations thou shalt do that, or in very truth woe will betide thee as sure as thou art living, and as thy Maker lives. Blockhead, this big adventurer swollen to the edge of bursting, he is not great and honorable, he is huge and abominable. Thou shalt honor the right man, and not honor the wrong, under penalties of an alarming nature. Honor Barabbas the robber, thou shalt sell old clothes through the cities of the world, shalt accumulate sordid moneys, with a curse on every coin of them, and be spit upon for 1800 years. Raise statues to the swollen adventurer as if he were great, sacrifice oblations to the king of scrip, unfortunate mortals, you will dearly pay for it yet. Quiet as nature's counting house and scrip ledgers are, no faintest item is ever blotted out from them, for or against, and to the last doit that account to will have to be settled. Rigorous as destiny, she is destiny. Chancery or fetter lane is soft to her, when the day of settlement comes. With her. In the way of abatement, of oblivion neither gods nor man prevail. Abatement? That is not our way of doing business, the time has run out, the debt it appears is due. Will the law of gravitation abate for you? Gravitation acts at the rate of 16 feet per second, in spite of SLL prayer. Were it the crash of a solar system, or the fall of a Yarmouth herring, all one to gravitation. Is the fall of a stone certain, and the fruit of an unwisdom doubtful? You unfortunate beings! Have you forgotten it, in this immense improvement of machinery, cheapening of cotton, and general astonishing progress of the species lately? With such extension of journals, human cultures, universities, periodic and other literatures, mechanics institutes, reform of prison discipline, abolition of capital punishment, enfranchisement by ballot, report of parliamentary speeches, and singing for the million? You did not know that the universe had laws of right and wrong, you fancied the universe was an oblivious greedy blockhead, like one of yourselves, attentive to scrip mainly, and willing, where there was no practical scrip, to forget and forgive? And so, amid such universal blossoming forth of useful knowledges, miraculous to the thinking editor everywhere, the soul of all knowledge, not knowing which a man is dark and reduced to the condition of a beaver, has been omitted by you? You have omitted it, and you should have included it. The thinking editor never missed it, so busy wondering and worshipping elsewhere, but it is not here. And alas, apart from editors, are there not men appointed specially keep you in mind of it, solemnly set apart for that object, thousands of years ago? Crabbe, descanting on the so-called Christian Claris, has this wild passage: legions of them, in their black or other gowns, I still meet in every country, masquerading, in strange costume of body, and still stranger of soul, mumming, priming, grimacing, poor devils, shamming, and endeavoring not to sham, that is the sad fact. Brave men many of them, after their sort, and in a position which we may admit to be wonderful and dreadful. On the outside of their heads some singular headgear, tulip mitre, felt coal scuttle, purple hat, and in the inside, I must say, such a theory of God Almighty's universe as I, for my share, am right thankful to have no concern with it all. I think, on the whole, as broken-winged, self-strangled, monstrous a mass of incoherent incredibilities, as ever dwelt in the human brain before. O God, giver of light, hater of darkness, of hypocrisy and cowardice, how long, how long? For 2 centuries now it lasts. The men whom God has made, whole nations and generations of them, are steeped in hypocrisy from their birth upwards, taught that external varnish is the chief duty of man, that the vice which is the deepest in Gehenna is the virtue highest in heaven. Out of which, do you ask what follows? Look round on a world all bristling with insurrectionary pikes, kings and papas flying like detected coiners, and in their stead Icaria, Red Republic, new religion of the anti-virgin, literature of desperation curiously conjoined with phallus worship, too clearly heralding centuries of bottomless anarchy, hitherto one in the million looking with mournful recognition on it, silently with sad thoughts too unutterable, and to help in healing it not one anywhere hitherto. But as to statues, I really think the woods and forests ought to interfere. When a company of persons have determined to set up a brazen image, there decidedly arises, besides the question of their own £5 subscriptions, which men of spirit and money capital without employment, and with a prospect of seeing their names in the newspapers at the cheap price of £5, are very prompt with, another question, not nearly so easy of solution. Namely, this quite preliminary question, will it permanently profit mankind to have such a hero as this of yours set up for their admiration, for their imitation and emulation, or will it, so far as they do not reject and with success disregard it altogether, unspeakably tend to damage and disprofit them? In a word, does this hero's memory deserve a high column? Are you sure it does not deserve a deep coal shaft rather? This is an entirely fundamental question. Till this question be answered well in the affirmative, there ought to be a total stop of progress, the misguided citizens ought to be admonished, and even gently constrained, to take back their £5 notes, to desist from their rash deleterious enterprise, and retire to their affairs, a repentant body of misguided citizens. But farther still, and supposing the first question perfectly disposed of, there comes a second, grave too, though much less peremptory. Is this statue of yours a worthy commemoration of a sacred man? Is it so excellent in point of art that we can, with credit, set it up in our marketplaces as a respectable approach to the ideal? Or, alas, is it not such an amorphous brazen sotercan, bred of prurient heat and darkness, as falls, if well seen into, far below the real? The real, if you will stand by it, is respectable. The coarsest hobnailed pair of shoes, if honestly made according to the laws of fact and leather, are not ugly, they are honest and fit for their object. The highest I may look on them without displeasure, nay with a kind of satisfaction. This rude packing case, it is faithfully made, square to the rule, and formed with rough and ready strength against injury, fit for its use, not a pretentious hypocrisy, but a modest serviceable fact. Whoever pleases to look upon it, will find the image of a humble manfulness in it, and will pass on with some infinitesimal impulse to thank the gods. But this your ideal, my misguided fellow citizens? Good heavens, are you in the least aware what damage, in the very sources of their existence, men get from Cockney sotercans saluting them publicly as models of beauty? I charitably feel you have not the smallest notion of it, or you would shriek at the proposal. Can you, my misguided friends, think it humane to set up, in its present uncomfortable form, this blotch of mismolten copper and zinc, out of which good warming pans might be made? That all men should see this, innocent young creatures, still in arms, be taught to think this beautiful, and perhaps women in an interesting situation look up to it as they pass? I put it to your religious feeling. To your principles as men and fathers of families. These questions the woods and forests, or some other public tribunal constituted for the purpose, really ought to ask, in a deliberate speaking manner, on the part of the speechless suffering populations. It is the preliminary of all useful statue building. Till both these questions are well answered, the woods and forests should refuse permission, advise the misguided citizens to go home and repent. Really, if this statue humor go on, and grow as it has lately done, there will be such a public statue board requisite, or the woods and forests will have to interfere with such imperfect law as now is. The woods and forests, or if not they, then the commissioners of sewers, sanitary board, scavenger board, cleansing committee, or whoever holds or call usurp a little of the edile authority, cannot some of them, in the name of sense and common decency, interfere at least thus far? Namely, to admonish the misguided citizens, subscribers to the next brazen monster, or sad sculptural solecism, the emblem of far sadder moral ones, and exhort them, 3 successive times, to make warming pans of it and repent, or failing that, finding them obstinate, to say with authority, well then, persist, set up your brazen calf, ye misguided citizens, and worship it, you, since you will and can. But observe, let it be done in secret, not in public. We say, in secret, at your peril. You have pleased to create a new monster into this world, but to make him patent to public view, we for our part beg not to please. Observe, therefore. Build a high enough brick case or joss house for your brazen calf, with undiaphanous walls, and lighted by sky windows only. Put your monster into that, and keep him there. Thither go at your pleasure, there assemble yourselves, and worship your bellyful, you absurd idolaters, Ruin your own souls only. And leave the poor population alone, the poor speechless unconscious population whom we are bound to protect, and will. To this extent, I think the woods and forests might reasonably interfere.